everybody. Thank you, Denton folks, for having the pleasure to share with us your views and take about what's going on in US next week, and also for your comments on what we all have witnessed in this bumpy period. But anyway, I think it's very important to get to know from you your impression of what gonna look like the new administration. Everybody knows what it is at stake. We are very interested also in knowing from you how will, let's say, this new presidency try to cope with all the challenges we have ahead of us, and for sure, the way the new administration will try to shape the new collaboration with the EU and inside the EU with Italy, if it's that possible at all. But anyway, I don't want to steal too much time from listening to your comments. I would only like to ask my dear friend Marta Dassou, which is the senior advisor for Aspen in Italy and the editor-in-chief of Espana, just to say hello to our distinguished guests, and then we can pass the word to Mr. Luca Pocobelli for getting started. Marta, if you are online, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
See you.
Simon. I don't know why my camera is not working today. It's really a shame. I'm sorry for that. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
thanks a lot to you and our friends of the American Chamber of Commerce and Denton's Italy. It's a real opportunity to discuss the priorities of the Biden administration today. We cannot but say that we are living through a critical period in American history, and we will see what's going to happen in the next few weeks. Clearly, a major question mark regards the political environment in which the new Biden administration is going to work and operate. We will probably discuss this point later on, but my view is that much depends on the Senate, with the concrete possibility of a cumbersome impeachment procedure, and in any case, with a limited, very limited Democratic majority. Still, it is a majority and quite unexpected. And much depends, as a consequence, on the evolution of a Republican Party strongly divided internally. Repositioning is already happening in the Republican camp, and we have to see whether it will be possible for President Biden to pass a much-needed fiscal stimulus package. And clearly, internal dealings in the Democratic camp will be equally important. My view is that President Biden is the right person to guide a consensus-building exercise on both fronts. We have, in any case, I will be very brief, three silver linings. The first and the fundamental one is that democratic institutions have proved to be strong, even in front of an unprecedented assault. The strength of the largest Western democracy is there to stay. The second is that we can anticipate a rather quick recovery of the American economy, especially if coronavirus is kept under control through vaccination. A rebound can be anticipated on the basis of the key structure of the American economy with its very special resilience. And last but not least, the Biden administration will open up to a renewal of the relationship with Europe. My view is that it will not be possible to go back to the old and unbalanced transatlantic relationship. We need to discuss a new agenda, including two major challenges, climate change and the critical issue of how to deal with China. We need a new transatlantic deal in time of a very serious confrontation between democracies and illiberal powers. And in all that, Italy has a keen interest in keeping the US strongly anchored to Europe, for economic reasons, given the importance for the Italian business of the US market and of American investments in Italy, but also for political reasons. Italy's role in the EU and in the Mediterranean have always been stronger whenever we had a strong link to the US. And so let's start working again together. And I think that this workshop will help us as Europeans to grasp Biden administration priorities and reflecting about what that means for us Europeans. Thank again. Over to you, Simone, and thanks for this invitation.
No, Marta, thanks to you. Many issues to be addressed, and thank you for your opening remarks. It's going to be really interesting. So let me give the voice to Luca, so to introduce your colleague from the Denton side. And thank you again for all of you connecting from US and also throughout Italy. Luca, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you to Ms. Dassou for this interesting introduction, where a number of topics which my partners in the US and Governor Dean will touch base on. I will just spend a few words with a sort of provocation in order to then introduce the speech of my fellow partner Eric Tannenblatt. It's evident to everyone that the character attitude of Mr. Trump is completely different from the one of Mr. Biden. Therefore, there will be, by definition, a change in at least the attitude. But if we set aside for 1 second the character of the former president and we look at the pillar stone of the politics which have been followed in terms of economics, foreign policy, national security, my provocation is, are we really sure that it has been a bad presidency and there will be a huge change, or vice versa, the change will be stronger on some of these items and much harder on some of the others? Clearly, one of the severe issues with Mr. Trump faced was the management of the COVID-19 outbreak, which was clearly underestimated and minimized, and which probably caused or was one of the reasons causing, among the others, his defeat. But my provocation is, again, will things really change completely, or in reality only some changes here and there will change with the new administration? So I will pass over the speech to my fellow partner, Mr. Tannenblatt, and thank you in the meanwhile to the AmCham for co-hosting with us this opportunity, and also with my partners and Governor Dean for attending. Eric, to you. You have to unmute, probably, Eric, the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Luca, and thank you to the AmCham. We are delighted to be joining you today. As Luca indicated, my name is Eric Tannenblatt, and I am the Global Chair of Denton's Public Policy and Regulatory Practice. And I'm joined today by two of my colleagues who I'll introduce in a moment. As you are all aware, because I know you all are watching the news and reading the newspaper, this is a very challenging time for us in the United States. Just 8 days ago, voters in my home state of Georgia, and I'm speaking to you from Atlanta, Georgia, went to the polls to cast their vote in a historic general election runoff for 2 United States Senate seats, which ultimately determined that the Democrats are going to control the majority of the United States Senate, which is going to put one party in control of both chambers of commerce and the White House. The following day after that election, what is normally a ceremonial day in our country, when Congress certifies the votes of the Electoral College, supporters of Donald Trump, as we now are all very familiar, attacked our nation's capital, killing and injuring people, vandalizing our temple of democracy, and putting elected representatives of our people in danger. It is still hard for many of us to process what has occurred. and all of us have spent time working on Capitol Hill, and it's just very, very difficult for many of us. Our country is still dealing with the aftermath of this act of insurrection as the president awaits a vote, which is likely going to occur today to become the second, or to actually become the first president in history to potentially be impeached twice. All of this is occurring while we are only days away from the swearing in of Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States and Senator Kamala Harris as the first African-American and female vice president of the United States. This has been and continues to be a very tumultuous time in American politics. And many are hoping that with this new administration, as the earlier speaker indicated, we can turn the page and hopefully get back to normal order. President-elect Biden will be entering office with a team of new leaders and an aggressive agenda to address many of the challenges facing our country. As I mentioned, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. I'd like to introduce them to you. Governor Dean, who some of you may be familiar with, is the former governor of the state of Vermont. He also is a former candidate for president of the United States and also served as chairman of the Democratic National Committee. John Russell, who leads Denton's federal advocacy practice in Washington, D.C., is a veteran of Capitol Hill, where he served in a number of capacities, including on the senior staff of the former Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives. So to get us started, I'd like to ask both Governor Dean and John to just take a minute or two and share your reflections on the events of the past week and what it all means to you and where you think our country is at this moment and where it's going. And so, Governor Dean, let me start with you.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief. I thought Marta did a very good job in the introduction, sort of explaining how American politics worked. I was very impressed. We are at a crossroads. We have not seen this kind of disruption in American democracy since around the time of the Civil War. I think we'll recover, but I don't think we're done yet with some of the the violence and so forth and so on. I think it was a wake-up call to a lot of people who just somehow didn't see this coming. I did see this coming, and I believed it would happen. Certainly not in the form that it did happen. But I think America is still strong. I think the new administration. I was just thinking this today as Samantha Power was offered and accepted the USAID spot and also a spot on the National Security Council. I think this may be the strongest cabinet I've ever seen on the Democratic side in my lifetime in politics. Each person is experienced, very thoughtful, and I think Biden will run a very, very good operation. I have high hopes for the rekindling of the transatlantic relationship. I do believe that what Chancellor Merkel said about 3 years ago after she had spent some time with Trump is that the sentiment that we can no longer rely on America as an ally it was terrible at the time, but I think A, it was true, and B, I think our new relationship is going to be very different. There's going to be a lot more autonomy for the Europeans, and I think that's a very good thing. And interestingly, that was actually spelled out in President Obama's foreign policy, but for a large variety of reasons, it never happened that way. But now it is happening because by default, the Europeans have had to carve their own path. I spent a lot on the board of the National Democratic Institute. I spend a lot of time in former Soviet republics in Eastern Europe. I was interested in the introductory remarks about our relationship with China, and I think the EU and the United States do have to form a common front to decide what to do about China and how to interact with them. But I also would not put off, particularly coming from the United States, the continued threat from Russia. This morning, the Moldovan parliament voted to make Russia the second language, equal footing with Moldovan. We have big problems in Poland and in Hungary with democracy. So there are lots of big problems on both sides of the Atlantic. I think that you will find a partner in Joe Biden that you're incredibly comfortable with. He'll be very comfortable with you, having served as he did as Obama's vice president. So I'm optimistic. The relationship will be different. I think that's a good thing. I think there'll be a lot more independence in terms of Europeans making their own foreign policy. I think that's a very good thing. And I will put in a pitch, which because I'm so horrified by what the Bulgarians are doing to keep Northern Macedonia out of the EU. Can't you do something about them?
John, your reflections on the past week and where you think we are in America right now politically.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for joining us this morning. It's a true pleasure to be with you. I think that for those of us, you see the background behind me, that was a picture taken from my office window in the Capitol building when I was lucky enough to serve there. And I dug it up over the last week or so, because for a lot of us that live and work in Washington, that live and work in government, the assault on a building, a physical structure, really was much more troubling, concerning, and horrifying, I think is an appropriate term. Those of us that have spent time working up there, couldn't get much more further than 10 feet without the Capitol Police, of course, checking our IDs and making sure we were there, and we were the familiar faces. To see the doors overrun, to see Capitol Police officers backed into corners, surrounded by protesters, and I will call them not necessarily protesters, but an angry mob, insulted almost every fiber of my being, and I'm not alone in that feeling. It is not a partisan question. It's a question, it's an American question, I would argue. I believe Eric Tenenblatt called it our temple of democracy, and that is in fact what the United States Capitol building is. To see what had happened truly is mind-numbing for a lot of us. Where do we go from here? I think in some cases the actions of the president have given appropriate amount of cover for Republican legislators to step away from the president. Please do understand that while they might not like the president, the vast majority of the 204 Republicans in the House of Representatives come from districts where Donald Trump got more than 60% of the vote. Donald Trump is incredibly popular within the base of the Republican Party. In fact, an argument can be made that the reason Georgia went the way it did is because the president wasn't helping as much as he could have, and instead was talking about stolen elections. One could look as far back as Mitt Romney, which isn't that far back, and say it was the Trump coalition that's the difference. These people that feel disaffected, victimized in one way, shape, or form, who came to support the president weren't there to support Mitt Romney. It's a time of soul searching in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Certainly, most are looking very forward to January 20th at about 12:15 East Coast time, when a new president will be sworn in, but they're clear-eyed in the fact that Donald Trump isn't necessarily going anywhere. Whether he has Twitter access or not, he still will be a force to be dealt with, which is why I think you saw Mitch McConnell, or reports of Mitch McConnell, really cutting the ties last night. You don't get Mitch McConnell, as they said, advisors quoted in the New York Times without the former majority, or the majority leader saying, it's okay, go tell him what I said. We face amongst the horror of the images, what you do come away with, and I believe, Luca, it was you that said it, the democracy stands, our institutions stand. In fact, these protesters, rioters tried to stop a vote, and they didn't. They delayed it. I like to joke a little bit, and it's not that funny, but you in Italy, you play the football, and you play in rain. We as Americans are a little more delicate, and we play baseball. And if it rains just a little bit, we stop, and we wait for the rain to go away. Well, this could be construed, and I don't mean to marginalize in any way, shape, or form. It was a rain delay. The Congress, the House and the Senate came back, they got their work done, and the process continues. So there's a lot of noise, but the process, the institutions continue to stand firm.
Thanks, John. I want to talk about some of the issues that we are faced with beyond just the politics. One that I know you all are faced with as well is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And unfortunately, because of the activities that have occurred in the United States the last couple of weeks, there hasn't been the level of attention that it requires. We have record numbers of deaths. The pandemic continues to spread throughout the United States. There was a month's lag before the Congress passed a stimulus bill a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago. There's talk of additional stimulus. I'd like to get, and Governor Dean, why don't I start with you, since I failed to also acknowledge the fact that you are actually a medical doctor. But can you talk about your perspective as to what you see, where you see the pandemic right now, but then also the response from the government to date and what you see in the future?
Sure. And without wishing to be terribly partisan here, which of course I am, I had one of the most partisan jobs in Washington for 4 years. But you know, Trump is not an administrator, to be kind, and his administration revolved around people who would say yes to him. So the institutions that would normally manage this, which is always a problem anyway in a nation of 330 million people, have been incredibly ineffective. And there's a wide variety of approaches because there are 50 states and many of the states have their own approaches. So we are in some trouble. Biden has appointed some extraordinary people to critical jobs. There was a young woman last night, Rochelle Walensky, who was just appointed the CDC director. She's going to be among the best CDC directors we've ever had. The kinds of appointments he's had. His chief of staff, Ron Klain, is a very no-nonsense guy who actually played a fairly big role in the rollout of Obama's approach on the Ebola virus in Africa. And so I think you'll see a more organized approach. The truth is we do have the vaccine. It is being distributed. It's not being distributed very well. Part of that is because of the federal government, and part of that is because there's many problems in the state governments, which have been more chaotic than they should be. New York City is one, California is another. I mean, these are two really big states. And when you have that many people, that are not getting clear messages about what needs to be done, that's a problem. I'm optimistic. The vaccines have started. They're going on in a relatively organized way. New York finally did get their act together yesterday and has a website that people are now signing up for specific appointments on. I would not say it was America's finest hour in terms of an organized response. One thing Americans have done very well in general around the world over the last 60 or 70 years is respond in an organized way to huge unforeseen tragedies. That is not the case in this situation, but I do have confidence in the people that Biden has chosen. I think the senior people in his administration who are not directly going to be making these decisions are also experienced in the matter of what to do about pandemics. It'll be a fact-based approach, and I think that I'm optimistic going forward, although I think we're going to have a very difficult next 6 weeks.
John, can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of what you see happening from a policy standpoint in the Congress? Because I know it was a rather contentious debate, different priorities, different parties. Now you are going to have one party in the majority in both chambers, but maybe in answering it too, you could address the fact that even though the Democrats will be in the majority in the Senate, the margins are going to be so small.
I'd be happy to. I'll start with, shall we say, the latter before the former. In the House of Representatives, Democrats have a governing majority, and it is the smallest governing majority the Democrats have ever faced in modern times. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, can lose really no more than 4 of her own members on any piece of legislation. She has to, because she will get, we suspect, little to no help from Republicans as they move forward. So Speaker Pelosi is going to have a real tight grip on her majority in the House. In the Senate, while the Democrats do have a majority because of a little, I shouldn't say a quirk, but the way it's structured, the Vice President of the United States is in fact the President of the Senate and can in fact cast tie-breaking votes. As you know, it is a 50-50 split in the House, in the Senate right now. So remember that the vast majority of legislation that passes the United States Senate, that makes it to the president's desk, has to have 60 votes. So at the end of the day, Majority Leader Schumer, I got to get used to saying that now, Majority Leader Schumer will have his 50 Democratic votes banked. He's got to go out and get 10 more Republican votes to add to that to pass anything in the Senate. So that's to say that's tough sledding, to be honest with you, in both chambers for both Democratic leaders. And it should be known that even with the or understood, I should say, even with the events of the last week or so, Republicans feel that they are within a horse's hair, if you will, or horse's nose, of recapturing the majority. So they are not in a stance or a position where they're going to be wanting to reach out to the other side and make life easier for Nancy Pelosi. That said, here's what we expect. Majority Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and Joe Biden have said within the first 100 days that we will have a massive COVID response. That massive COVID response, I think, means a significant amount of spending both in the healthcare space, but also in the economic stimulus space. This will be an opportunity for 4 years of pent-up frustrations of Democrats to find their way into legislative agendas. What does that mean? Well, in some cases, I think that means a pretty aggressive infrastructure plan. Clearly, we will try and drive jobs out of that type of legislation. But if you bifurcate it here, in between a COVID response from a health perspective and a COVID response from an economic perspective, you get a massive piece of legislation. Should Americans expect to get another check from the federal government? I think that's in play. Should hospitals expect to get some sort of relief, given that they have had to focus truly on COVID response and not the elected procedures that keep them in business? I think so. From a broader structure, what are we doing with our government health programs? Medicaid in particular. Medicaid is our health safety net. It has been ravaged by COVID. What are we going to do from a perspective there? I think that when you're thinking about the response from Congress, you look at it through, as I said, those two kind of buckets. But in each bucket, whether it be economic stimulus, where we say infrastructure will be heavy, I think you also have to understand that the infrastructure of our healthcare response will be leading the charge in that bucket of a stimulus package, and we expect it to be out the door and on the president's desk probably by April 1st at the latest.
Governor Dean, do you think that the U.S. under a Biden administration will be more actively engaged with the World Health Organization?
Oh, yeah. I think we will rejoin all the organizations. I think we will try, I know this is a high on the European agenda, I think we will try to rejoin the Iranian nuclear agreement. I think, Joe Biden's an internationalist, and I think we'll see a lot of undoing of all the approach, the isolationist America First approach that Trump took.
So you mentioned the Iranian deal. Why don't you also talk about the Paris Climate Accords?
Yeah, you'll see that he'll sign up for that immediately. And that's clearly a serious issue. Many of his people his appointees are very serious about climate change. So he'll get back into that as well.
And John, do you see any resistance both for the Iranian deal and the Paris Climate Accord from Republicans on Capitol Hill? And does it matter?
Well, I think that it doesn't really matter, Eric. Let's be honest. Now, I think on the climate thing, certainly you're going to on the Paris Accords, you'll have rhetoric, but they can't stop it. And I think the Iranian deal and rejoining the Iranian deal, you might find a handful of Republicans, and maybe not so much of a handful, but one or two in the Senate as well, that would support such re-engagement. That said, life of the minority, you can yell on the sidelines, but you can't really do very much.
But I would add to that, Eric. It's not entirely clear to me that the Iranians are going to want to get back into the Iranian deal. I think, other than possibly the Chinese, they're the toughest negotiators on the planet, and I have some concerns about whether they've gone far enough so they're not willing to go back, and so we're going to need a lot of help from the European partners and also Russia on that one.
Any thoughts on the Middle East, Governor Dean? One area that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, made that a priority. We've entered into some new agreements, or not we did, but Israel entered into some new agreements. What do you see on that front with regards to the Biden administration?
I think because of Netanyahu, the damage between the American Jews and Israel is probably permanent. And I think that they have so poisoned the well, beginning with Netanyahu's address during the Obama administration, trying to the United States Congress while Obama was trying to get a treaty through, has probably poisoned that relationship. But nonetheless, Israel is still going to be a very important military ally in the Middle East. So I would imagine that, well, first of all, we have to see what's going to happen in the Israeli election and see how many political lives Netanyahu actually has, which is a great many, going up into almost as many as Donald Trump appears to have sometimes. And I think of them as quite similar. So it's very, very complicated. I think our relationship with the Saudis will not be as warm as it might have been. In general, Trump was very comfortable with authoritarians. Biden is not going to be comfortable with authoritarians. He's not going to be comfortable with people who violate human rights. And I think that'll be reflected in our foreign policy. I do not expect any vast changes. I do expect a very much cooling of the relationships that we have with authoritarians. We will be correct. I can't imagine that we're going to continue to give al-Sisi the kind of foreign aid that he's gotten. So there will be some changes, but I do not think there's going to be a vast difference. You will not see Viktor Orban in the White House shaking hands with the President of the United States again, though.
So, John, let's pivot to trade while we're still talking about global relations. There was a big change among Republicans through the Trump administration. The Republicans historically have been free trade proponents. That was tempered during the Trump days. What do you see on the horizon as it relates to trade?
I think you've seen a fundamental shift, and just to speak to the Republican side of this for a second, you've seen a fundamental shift amongst the members of Congress of the Republican side who on trade. They are not free traders anymore. They are, in fact, they have embraced a populist message here where trade is in fact bad and trade is the reason why your neighbor lost their job if in fact you didn't lose yours. That is a dramatic shift. You started to see some inklings of this, I think, during the Obama administration, but Trump was really able to galvanize that side of the Republican Party. And gosh, if you look back at the attempts to change the party platform, which of course failed during the summer conventions, I don't think it's going to be a while before you see. Before the Republican Party, which at that time, gosh, back in the 90s was the party of NAFTA. Yes, it was Bill Clinton that got it done, but in fact, it was the Republicans in the House that had to push and really get it done. But from an administration perspective, here again, let's remember that the House Republicans don't really matter that much on trade, and you still have in the Senate, though, some of, if you will, the old school institutionalist Republicans who do believe in free trade. I don't think you're going to see trade, though, from a Biden administration perspective, used in the way that it was used during the Trump era. It will not be, sanctions will be still part of our our toolkit. However, they will not be thrown around, I think, as much as they were during the Trump administration. I don't think you're going to see tariffs thrown around as much in the Trump administration. One of those reasons for that is because of those tariffs, our agriculture sector has truly been propped up by the American taxpayer to somewhat historical extent over these last about 3.5 years. That's going to stop. The money just isn't there, and there's a desire for that money to be spent on other priorities. So almost out of necessity, I think you're going to see the Biden administration move to a much more process-based decision-making matrix that will, in fact, not rely heavily on tariffs to get a point across.
Governor Dean, anything you want to add on that point?
Oh, I think John's exactly right. Look, trade is defense. I mean, we may try to get into the TPP. That'll be very difficult with the way it's been reconfigured as a result of Trump's refusal. I think American, especially Democratic Party, actually most American leadership on both parties until Trump understood that there was a relationship between defense pacts and trade pacts. And I think that's not widely understood by the American public. So I agree with John. Trade is basically good for the United States. Most business leaders think it's good for the United States. And I think you'll see some expansions. I think you'll see this ridiculous tariffs that we have on, French brandy and all this nonsense that's going to go away. There'll probably be the biggest problem with trade that we're going to have, and the relationship which has been fundamentally changed and which will not go back to normal, is our relationship with China. And that we have to work out with the Europeans. China has become much more aggressive, both on trade and a number of other areas. And I think that will be the biggest challenge of all. That's not coming back to what it was pre-Trump.
One other topic that I think is probably worth just touching on is big tech, because one of the vehicles, or probably the main vehicle Donald Trump used to communicate with his base, was Twitter. And he has now been shut out of Twitter, shut down on Facebook. Yesterday, his YouTube channel was shut down. I know that this is an issue that is a global issue, but any thoughts on what we're going to do to address the whole issue of big tech?
That's going to be absolutely fascinating. It's the one thing I agreed with Trump on, is that we should, in fact, get rid of Section 230, which my law firm does not agree with. Some very important clients in that space. But big tech, this is not something that really actually had to do with Trump. Big tech has fallen out of favor, particularly with young people, which is very threatening to big tech. They have their programs are much less interoperable, which drives me crazy because I'm 72 years old and I have a struggle with this stuff anyway. And these large companies are making it really difficult to use each other's products, which is something that is important. So I don't think we'll go as far as the Europeans have gone, but I think we will not be the supporters of American technology companies, large American technology companies that we have been in the past. That is also there's an area where the American and the Europeans should find some common ground going forward as well. Tech is not what it was before Trump. It really doesn't have that much to do with Trump, although the rioters did use it to organize. But it has to do with the size. It has to do, frankly, with the kind of monopoly capitalism that we had in the 1910s before the regulatory. There'll be a lot of talks about breaking up big tech and how you do that. And that'll be happening on both sides of the Atlantic. So I actually look forward to a dialogue about what approaches we should take. I don't think you're going to see the kind of oppositional no that's been in the last 4 years to the European approach to taxing tech and so forth and so on. I don't think we'll be enthusiastic about taxing American companies, but I think we will. I think it'll be a dialogue where we have something to learn, because we now have a problem with big tech's enormous power. And I'll leave aside the whole notion of the First Amendment problems, which we're going to also have a very difficult time sorting out. And I'm not sure what the right solution is, but there has to be a solution.
I think big tech saw this coming. I think big tech got it, had looked at the tea leaves and thought there is a reckoning coming. So allow me to sound cynical, but I would remind you I would say I am not a cynic. I'm merely an idealist who suffers no illusions. And I mean that. But I'm shocked I am that that the day the Democrats take control of the United States Senate, big tech responds by, in fact, deplatforming Republicans and conservatives across the country. Shocked! Can't believe they did that. I think they understand that a conversation is coming. I think they understand that certainly significantly more scrutiny is coming, and they are doing the best they can in the short term to set the battlefield favorably to them, so that they can point to, after more than 4 years of allowing these shenanigans to happen, allowing hate speech, and Governor's right, we have a tremendous issue to work through with the First Amendment. But all of a sudden, they have found religion in the last week that happened to coincide with Chuck Schumer getting the gavel. Shocked I am.
Let's talk. We're limited on time, and there are a couple of other issues that I really wanted to talk about. One is tax policy. Obviously, tax policy impacts us here in the United States domestically, but also globally. The Trump administration, with the help of the Republicans, passed through sweeping tax reform several years ago. What is going to happen as it relates to tax policy? Governor Dean, let me start with you.
You'll see some rollbacks, but I don't think that you're going to see a rollback of the whole thing. The time to raise taxes is probably not in the middle of a recession. And we don't have a recession technically, but the reason we don't have a recession is because interest rates are essentially zero or something close to it. And because there's so much capital, borrowed money flowing out of Washington that you couldn't possibly have a recession. I don't know what you could do to have a recession. So there's going to be a financial reckoning here, unless modern monetary theory is suddenly accepted by a lot more economists than it has been in the last 10 years. This isn't going to work. And so you will see some adjustments. I think you'll see some adjustments at the upper income groups, but I don't think you're going to see a wholesale backsliding. The corporate tax may go up, but I personally, as a Democrat, don't want to see it go up to the levels that it was at before, because I think we do need to be competitive with the rest of the world. So it's going to be very complicated. There will be all kinds of bills put in by populists on the left side in the Democratic Party about raising taxes. And as John pointed out, we only have an 8-vote margin, which means we can only lose 4 votes. And I just don't. You'll see some of it to go to good causes like funding infrastructure. I do not think you're going to see a wholesale revision of the tax bill, but I defer to Eric and John on this.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, here's just to talk a little bit about process. I had mentioned earlier that you needed 60 votes to pass anything in the United States Senate. You know, when you don't need 60 votes is actually tax and healthcare policy, and it's something called budget reconciliation. And in budget reconciliation, you only need 50, and then the vice president to be the 51st vote, and the bill is passed. This is how Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was passed. This is how the Trump tax cuts were passed. So you look really hard at those 50 Democrats in the United States Senate. You actually take out of this equation the House of Representatives. And when you're looking at those middle of the road-ish, and I'll say a gentleman by the name of Joe Manchin, who's a senator from West Virginia, certainly is getting a lot of attention these days. West Virginia is an incredibly red state. Joe Manchin is a Democrat. He does not face challenges, I should say, or legitimate challenges, either from his left or his right. He's pretty well liked, but that's because he represents his state. And as a Democrat, he's not afraid to be a little right of center. I don't think you're going to see sweeping tax changes, nothing like what you saw in the Trump tax bill. I do believe you will see playing at the edges. I do believe they're going to raise the corporate rate just a little bit. It's funny, I haven't heard the word inversion in the last 3 years. Might hear that word again. I do believe there will be, if not a millionaire's tax, something along the lines. Let's remember that soak the rich, tax the rich, however you want to call it, is a very popular phrase amongst House Democrats and a lot of Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats as well. So I think you're going to see some changes on the individual side. I think you're going to see some tweaks on the corporate side. but in no way, shape, or form are you going to see it as substantive of the changes that you saw when Trump did it in, what was that, 18?
Mm-hmm. What about, well, let's talk just briefly about immigration. I mean, immigration reform has been an issue that our country has struggled with for years. Even going back to President George W. Bush, when he tried to get a sweeping immigration plan passed and failed. Where do you see, I mean, Donald Trump made, immigration a big issue. In fact, just yesterday, he went down to Texas and, looked at his wall. So, why don't we start with you, Governor Dean? What do you see?
So the dirty little thing that I have to say about immigration is that the second largest number of deportations in American history came under President Barack Obama. So you're certainly not going to, first of all, the wall is going to collapse because it was built by a bunch of Trump cronies who got, no bid contracts, and they did a terrible job. So the wall is going to go away by itself. Some of it is just totally, a joke. But we still have a big problem. You can imagine, look, the Europeans and the Americans have a very similar problem, different ethnicities, but a very similar problem. We both know that an economy of almost 600 million people, being Europe, and an economy of 330 million people could easily take 3 or 4 million refugees a year and not have any problem economically. In fact, it would be good for us economically. We also know that from a political point of view, it's poison. As Angela Merkel found out, and as many Americans have found out. So the real problem with immigration is actually not that we're going to get ourselves run over. It's how you manage the expectations. And the expectations on immigration have not changed that much. So you're going to see very much of a rhetorical lowering of the kind of racism that Trump spewed. But I don't think you're going to see, and you're certainly not going to see camps, and you may well have ICE disbanded, partly because the Department of Homeland Security is a mess, and it never probably should have been created the way it was. It's just a super agency. It has about 7 intelligence agencies in there, and they all hate each other and won't cooperate, and it's just a disaster. So you may see that disbanded, but it probably won't be disbanded by rabid people who hate ICE. It'll be disbanded because our system doesn't work very well, and you may see it reconstituted. But the problem remains, and we're going to have to not have an open border, and we're probably going to go back to having people be allowed to seek asylum from the United States. Only about 25% of those people actually got asylum under Obama. So I think the temperature will be turned down. The wall will either go away or be ignored. But I don't think you're going to see an enormous fundamental change. The beatings will stop, the concentration camps will stop, but I think the numbers will not go up nearly as much as everybody expects.
John,
if Democrats move to disband ICE in any way, shape, or form, if you can tie ICE no longer existing and reconstituting some certain format before the 2022 elections, Republicans will take back the House of Representatives and will take back the United States Senate. Immigration for the Republican base is almost a third rail of American politics, or where there are far more build a wall, kick everybody out types than there are, hey, wait, immigrants are good for our country. And that's concerning, I think, for a lot of different reasons. I would also argue that if you go back and look at George W. Bush's attempt to do it, it wasn't Democrats that sank this. This was the nascent beginnings of Trump voters in the Republican Party that really galvanized around the issue of immigration, formed what was then thought of really as a backwater kind of caucus in the House of Representatives known as the Immigration Caucus. That caucus gave way to a Tea Party caucus, which then gave way to an a MAGA caucus. So there's a pretty strong line on immigration, and not necessarily in an open borders or a freer movement perspective. I do think that there will be, if you start looking at visas, but let's take illegal immigration off the table, visas and the rest, and asylum. I do believe the Biden administration will reverse course on the asylum issues, and I do think you're going to see some more H-1B visas, EB-3 visas, and the rest. That's still a tough thing to do legislatively, because you still have a number of Republicans in both chambers that don't want to see more numbers added.
And the other thing I'll say is I'm hoping that you're going to see a lot more student visas, because that was a terrible loss to lose all those students from abroad.
Yeah, I do want to give everyone an opportunity. If you have some specific questions, if you could put them in the chat box. I am looking at one question here about when do you think it will be possible to travel to the U.S.? Before I ask Governor Dean or John to respond to that, I do want you all to know that people in the U.S. love Italy, and we are all looking forward to coming back soon. So, John or Governor Dean.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd want to come here right now. Let us come go see you, please. It's much better over there.
That's just going to be a function of the virus load on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, that's all. That's what that is about. That has nothing to do with any anti-immigration sentiments. I mean, to go to Europe or not and so forth. That's just a function of how well the virus can be controlled, and I'm expecting that to be controlled by the vaccine. I'm guessing it may be June at the earliest.
I have a little bit longer of a time frame, but do agree with the governor, and I think it's plan your fall vacations. Disney World Orlando is delightful in October.
Here's another question. How will trade to and from the United States change after COVID pandemic? And yeah.
You're already seeing a reshift of supply chains. And I think that has just really begun. And as you all know, once you start that process, it's really hard to rein it back in. So I think that you're seeing a change in supply chains. I think you are seeing, at least from an American perspective, a desire to bring some of these, not all of them, but some of these manufacturing jobs out of China and into other places, shall we say Vietnam or other places in Southeast Asia. Governor, what are your thoughts?
I think that's exactly right. People are going to, the supply chains are going to be shorter, and there are going to be more of them in different places, and the level of wages is not going to be determinant of where the supply chains are as has been in the past. It's the cheapest place. It's not going to be necessarily the winner. It's going to be the place that can more reliably deliver the supplies because we had tremendous disruptions. I don't believe that there's going to be a big problem between the United States and Europe in terms of trade. We're both highly developed economies. I think the people that are going to be hurt the most are the UK because of Brexit. But other than that, I just don't see a fundamental changing in the relationship between the UK and between the EU and the United States. In fact, I think the relationship will be stronger.
Governor, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but we had a specific question about what kind of revision do you see in tariffs for Italian products in the new Biden administration?
I think in general, it'll be the same as the French products. Most of them are put on by pique on the part of the president rather than actual policy. And there's no reason to have, of course, there are always trade frictions between trading partners, but there's plenty of ways to resolve those. There are mechanisms to resolve those. And I just don't see the animus particularly between Europe and the United States on trade issues. There will always be some, and we'll always have to resolve them, but it'll be done through, I think, low temperature negotiations.
How much influence, and both of you can respond to this, how much influence do you think Kamala Harris is going to have on the positions of the administration?
I'll just answer the traditional role of the vice president is not, Dick Cheney accepted, is not to have that much influence. You basically have a discussion with the president. Biden will listen to her. He's a guy who does listen to other people's opinions, and then he'll do what he needs to do, and she will get on board. So I don't imagine any serious friction. I mean, I'm sure that was part of the discussion about whether she was going to take the post or not.
Well,
I'd argue,
go ahead, John.
aside from funerals and state events internationally, the number one job of the vice president is to not outshine the sun. The sun is Joe Biden.
Right.
So her job will be not to get in any of those rays so that we all may feel the love that is Joe Biden's not so great face peel. Sorry.
Well, Governor Dean and John, it's always a pleasure having a conversation with you, especially in front of an audience. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank everyone from AmCham for listening to us and providing us this opportunity to talk about U.S. politics. Earlier this week, Denton's issued our annual policy scan. This is a very comprehensive document that we put out that covers a full range of issues before the United States, both at the federal level and the state level. That is available to all of you to get a copy of. We encourage you to look at it. And if you have any questions for anything you read there or any questions about U.S. Politics, please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Luca.
Thank you, Eric, John, and Governor Dean. I think it has been a very interesting discussion.
We cannot hear you, Luca. I think you just freeze for a second. We cannot hear you at the moment. No, I will hand it over to Mr. Krolla if he's still on the line with us.
Yes, absolutely. So
back to Luca.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, John. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Luca. I think we'll see you around. We're not too far from ourselves, from our building. So in Milano, everything is really very close to each other. So thank you for your perspective, your remarks. We have heard something very reassuring. So we hope things will go in the right direction and we can let at our shoulder all the difficult time we have witnessed. So thank you, Marta, for your initial remarks. And again, so we are here just to serve you, to help navigate these difficult times. The flow of investment is still around, nonetheless, the COVID. So, I mean, we need to increase, and thanks to this kind of discussion, we can reassure all our members that US and Europe and Italy, among the European states, is still open for business. So, again, thank you for your word, for your time, and it has been really interesting. Hope to see you soon in Italy.
Thank you.
Bye to you. Bye. Thank you. Have a good day.
Arrivederci.
Bye.
Arrivederci. Ciao. Thank you again.